Disclaimer. The contents of Studio 151 podcast do not represent the views and beliefs of the TU Media Lab or the University of Tulsa.
Welcome to the Balls Talk Sports NFL podcast, tri-weekly edition. We're getting to the point in the season where we have a pretty good idea of where most teams are, so it's time to play some contenders and pretenders. And with the playoff races starting to get tight, we'll dive into some alive or dead as well. After that, we'll open the head coaching hot seat conversation and get into a little bit of early 2025 draft talk. So without further ado, Victor, are you ready to get kinky?
It's been a wild 3 weeks. Well, more than that, but we're ready to get out here and get kinky talking about some NFL football.
All right, then I'll get it started with my kink of the week, which is white-hot quarterbacking rage.
Oh.
You know, after Joe Burrow throws his 5th touchdown of the game, just putting the team on his back and single-handedly keeping it competitive, and then he has to watch his defense be completely unable to essentially swat a fly, and then you see his face on the sideline. The camera pans to Burrow sitting on the bench, and he's got the Superman laser eyes, just staring off into space, and you know exactly what's going on in his head. The same face that Baker Mayfield makes after he stiff-arms Nick Bosa and throws across his body to move the chains on 4th down, and then a kicker who's missed 3 times drills the game winner to essentially knock the Bucs out of the playoff conversation. We'll get into that in a minute. Yeah, that face. Now, white-hot quarterbacking rage is distinct from, say, cynical quarterbacking indifference, which is what we see out of Aaron Rodgers when he throws his 3rd interception of the game because Mike Williams is 6 inches too far to the right.
Yeah, that's what happens when you try to be the play caller and the quarterback, and then you don't tell your team to play. I don't think you get to be mad about that. That's your own fault. But yeah, Baker and Joe are 2 great examples. I think another one is Stroud. They're all just so pissed how they're letting their team down. That Bosa play was one of the freakiest things I've ever seen.
That was completely insane. Oh, look, I have to play devil's advocate. I know Bosa is probably trying not to draw like a roughing the passer call on 4th and long, but still, he stiff-armed Nick Bosa and drilled the throw crossbody. What a highlight reel play. He should have bought his team the win.
Absolutely. And it was on 4th and 7 too. Do or die. You don't get that? It's over. But he does. And then they lose because Jake Moody hits one just inside the uprights. Baker's going to be pissed this week.
Yes, he is. My prediction for the most pissed off quarterback is actually going to be Geno Smith.
Oh.
Can't you just picture, he's got a little bit of time, he's splitting the safeties, he's making big throws downfield, but then ultimately it's just a little too late. He gets drilled by Nick Bosa, throws a deep one up to DK Metcalf, who snapped off the route too early, and it's intercepted.
Yeah, that could happen. He's leading the league in passing yards, and I think he's leading the league in the most frustrating ex-wide receiver in DK Metcalf, who doesn't have a clue in the world about what he wants to do on any given route. So,
he is ripped though.
Yeah, he's ripped. He's big. He can jump. Doesn't mean he's always going to catch it when he jumps. Jump balls, you do have to jump. That's part of it, but then you have to catch the ball too, and that's generally where the issue comes in with DK Metcalf. Doesn't matter how perfectly Geno puts it. I mean, it's the amount of times you watch Geno tear off this chin strap and go back to the sideline devastated because the ball bounced off of Jackson Smith and Jigba's hands into the other team. JSN's not a great example, but it's sad.
They should all get a support group together.
They should. Like, that's the NFL gridiron, whatever the hell those guys do, they should get on that.
I feel like Derek Carr would be a good mediator because he's just kind of checked out.
Yeah,
he's laughing on the sideline down 3 scores.
I think Derek Carr is like the antithesis of that because everyone else on the Saints is mad at him. So I think, and then he's the joker on the sideline.
He's going with the flow.
Yeah,
life is good. You're getting paid.
Yeah, he's getting $40 million a year for doing basically nothing, and he's not going to have to play an extra game in the playoffs. He knows that. So we're winning.
If the NFL is serious about mental health, they need to get this going.
Absolutely. Need to make sure those players have some sort of support system when your job is making you suffer this much. All right, on to my kink of the week. This is going to be something that we see a lot more in college, but it's starting to transfer into the NFL a little bit. I feel like a lot of people, there's a lot of different names for it, but I like the star position. That guy that he'll play nickel. I'm half of the downs, but then he'll play safety. He'll play one of the safeties. He could play single high, but generally play strong safety for another 25% of the downs, and then he'll come down as the weak side linebacker for 25% of the downs. And generally that's the split. You've got a lot of teams trying this out in low quantities with some players, but I think there's 4 that I've noticed have really, at least with younger guys, some teams this is just the way that some guys like to play, but with younger guys, they've made this their position, and I think it's the Ravens with Kyle Hamilton, the Texans with Jalen Petrie, the Chiefs have been doing this a lot with Jamari Connor on a lower snap count, but he's still doing that more, and the Packers with Javon Bullard. They've even brought Evan Williams there occasionally, but it's mostly been Bullard. And all 4 of those guys, Hamilton 2022 class, Petrie 2023 class, or 2022?
2023, I thought. I think
23?
this is his second year, isn't it?
Yeah. Petrie 23, Connor 23, Bullard 24. All of them are young guys. All of them are getting a lot of snaps in different positions. And these defensive coordinators are doing a really good job of just moving them around. They've found chess pieces on the defense. And if there's one thing we know about defensive coordinators, is they love to use their chess pieces. So you get to move somebody from, and it's you can put them in their pre-snap look doesn't really matter because half the time they're going to shift. It's incredible. Kyle Hamilton almost never ends up in the same quadrant of the field that he started in. He's just all over the place, and it's not him doing it, it's the coach telling him to do it. They're having a lot more freedom with the flexibility in a nickel package. We have our defensive backs can play more than one position.
Do you think Brian Branch in Detroit fits that bill?
I do. I didn't put him there because he's played a lot of outside corner too, and I think that that's kind of
Just add another position on top of it.
because there's the star position, but then there's the guy that plays literally everywhere on the field. It's like your Brian Branches, your Kyle Duggars, your Antoine Winfields. These guys do whatever they want to, and it's like they qualify as a star plus. They're a supernova. All right, these guys are insane. Brian Branch absolutely. I think in his first year he definitely qualified for the star position, but he's playing outside corner. DPOY candidate.
He's having that kind of season.
I mean,
I think it speaks to how disruptive these star players, these big nickel types that shift all over and can make plays, can get their hands into passing lanes, can make big tackles and punch the ball out against the run. It speaks to how disruptive they can be. And I really feel like the NFL is headed in a direction where disruption is key. I think we've seen the same thing kind of on the interior defensive line. It feels like we're seeing more superstar pass rushing 3 techniques, for example, who just create a ton of penetration against both the run and the pass. And you touched on how this is something that goes on in college. Well, a position I'm kind of a fan of in college is the Jack or the Joker or whatever you want to call it. Every team has one, and they're all named after some animal and or their mascot. And it's really just the strong side backer, maybe gets into a little bit of defensive end, maybe alternates between a hand in the dirt and playing from a 2-point stance. And it feels like the defensive adjustment that we've seen as offenses have gotten more creative. If you aren't able to beat what offenses want to do to you with the scheme, down in, down out, you need big disruptive plays that force turnovers. I think that's the way that defense is headed both in college and in the NFL.
absolutely, because I mean, you look at it. I feel like guys in the star position, but just overall, the resurgence the surgence we've seen from the nickel position. Those guys are playmakers. Sometimes you'll see them get beat a lot more, but sometimes you'll see them. If there's ever a DB who you're calling their name a lot, it's usually going to be a nickel because they have the opportunities to make more plays. And you talked about the jack position. One guy that I think that position has transferred well into the NFL is Trenton Simpson on the Ravens. Played that a lot in Clemson, kind of shifted between edge and strong side linebacker, but he's doing that a lot with the Ravens too, and they're having fun with him.
Zaven Collins as well.
Yeah, shout out to you, grad. But Zaven's doing that a lot as well. And then the Patriots have always, I feel like they've been one of the few teams that have had that going for a while. Like Van Noy, that was his big thing. And it's still doing that on the Ravens too.
Yes, he is. He's having a great season.
Absolutely.
All right, so now we'll get into some contenders or pretenders. And the way I have the teams arranged is loosely from strongest to weakest. So I want to start with the Pittsburgh Steelers. We've seen they put Russ in as the starting quarterback, and this just looks like an entirely different team with a new look offense. We know some of this team's defensive merits. Are they contenders or pretenders?
Well, listen, we're filming this, or we're recording this on the Saturday before they play the Ravens. So I think this game's going to tell us a lot about whether they're contenders or pretenders. But if I had to stick my flag in it right now, go one way or the other, I think the Steelers are contenders. I think that they are a team that can make the Super Bowl, because ultimately when you define a contender, it's a team that can make the Super Bowl and isn't a massive underdog. Because the Steelers have what it takes. Not only do you have what, in my opinion, is the most necessary thing, a good quarterback head coach combo. It seems like you need those guys to really not only be good in both of their aspects, but to be able to trust each other and work well together. And it seems like Russ and Tomlin have that right now. And then there's just a lot of talent across this team. And whenever you merge talent with a great defensive and offensive scheme that is using that talent in the right way, like it seems like the Steelers have, it can bring a lot. And I think it's a tough AFC to get there to the Super Bowl. It'll be a tough road, but I believe the Steelers can do it.
This decision gave me a lot of pause because I think that this is just a good football team. Essentially, in all aspects, it feels like they check a lot of boxes, especially in the coaching. I mean, we know about Mike Tomlin's avoiding the losing season streak, and they've taken a step up from that. But as of right now, before they play the Ravens, I still have this team as a pretender.
Ooh.
And the big reason why is you look at the Pittsburgh Steelers, what are they great at? I think they have a lot of strengths. I think this is a legitimately vertical offense that can throw up those moon balls, and they have wideouts who will go up there and make plays. I think this is a run game that can beat up on bad run defenses. They have some pieces in the secondary, and like I already mentioned, they're really well coached. What are they great at? I only see one thing, and it's defensive line play. They're going to be getting Alex Highsmith back. You pair him with TJ Watt. They have the deepest defensive line in football, and we see that against both the run and the pass. They're multiple, they're disciplined, but I just don't have faith in the offense right now. That's reason number one. We haven't seen this Russell Wilson passing offense tested against good competition. I don't know if the cohesion is there. I still don't know what exactly to think about Russell Wilson. And I don't think this is a dominant run game either. I think they're right around league average by most metrics. Zach Frazier's doing great things on the interior, but I don't think this is a kick-you-in-the-teeth sort of offensive line. And maybe we see that against better defensive lines, and now they can't get into the play action as effectively. And then the other factor, and this could change, I acknowledge this, the Steelers are a team that really, for me, could ascend to contender status. The secondary needs to play better. Joey Porter Jr. isn't having the kind of sophomore season that we expected. Dante Jackson has been really rough. The linebackers have been flying around against the run, but Patrick Queen has been out of position. Deshaun Elliott, the strong safety, also having a great season, but primarily against the run. They have been vulnerable against the deep to intermediate passing attack, and I think that's what we see from the really good teams that they're going to be going up against in the playoffs.
Yeah, you bring up a lot of good points there, and I think I share those same offensive worries. I don't know what to think about Russ because, I mean, it's documented that I am a Broncos fan, and my issues with Russ have been we've talked about them at length on the show, but especially when he got started, we both thought that was a bad decision to put him in, but so far it's been working well. But this is a really big week for them. This will show us if they are contenders or if they are pretenders, and these offensive concerns are real. But ultimately, when it comes down to it, I think this is more like I think last year or the year before that, I'm saying they're probably pretenders. But the way that this league is shifting right now towards the defensive landscape, this is a defense that can make plays. When it comes down to it, they can go out there, and I believe this is one of the few defenses in the league that can win a game for a football team, even with a shoddy offensive performance, like we probably will see from Russ in this squad multiple times through the rest of the season, however far they go. I believe in this secondary. They're not the best group of guys, but I believe in Joey Porter Jr. to a fault.
You've got to.
Yeah, like what he showed in his rookie season was solid, and how he started the season was very good. but it's been rough. You also have to attribute it to some of the fact that he has played the best receiver. He has been pretty much isolated with the best receiver on the opposing team every game. They've been putting him on there, and then that's why the defense, in my opinion, has worked so well, because you can put these guys who maybe aren't as good, give them a little bit more help. Use Minka as a chess piece. You can play him wherever he wants. Play Minka. Minka has been so good this year in coverage, just as far as let's just put him wherever we're getting beat right now. Let's bracket him there. Let's make sure that we can have Minka be the support staff. He's the safety. He's their safety net right now. So if they want to go to the Super Bowl, if they want to prove they're contenders, they need to at least play the Ravens really close this week. Have a loss like the Vikings did to the Lions earlier in the season. And if they want to go to the Super Bowl, they need TJ Watt to go and play like his defensive player of the year for him. They need this defensive line play to keep playing. They need some of those guys in the secondary to take a step up. They need Minka to keep playing well, and they need this offense to remain consistent and establish an identity.
I'm fascinated to see how well Pittsburgh's offense can run its script against the Ravens, because Baltimore is running a hell of a defensive line out there every week. And there are two names that really stick out to me on the Steelers' offensive unit, and that's Broderick Jones and Mason McCormick, I believe right tackle and right guard, both having really rough seasons, surrendering a lot of pressure. And Russell Wilson, early in his career against pressure, sure, you're happy with that. He can get out of the pocket and he can launch a 55-yard pass downfield for a big touchdown. At this stage in Russ's career, that's just not really the type of player I see. The play-action attack, I do think, is going to be eliminated. I don't think that Pittsburgh is going to be able to run the ball against this really strong Ravens front seven. I think we're going to just know how well Pittsburgh can drop back and sling the football downfield and hang in a shootout like they're going to have to in the playoffs.
Yeah, you gotta be able to pass the football. Running's great, defense is great, but ultimately this is still an offensive league. As much as defense is trending upwards right now, Russell Wilson has got to be able to stick in the pocket and make a play, and he's shown flashes of that so far in the first 3 weeks of play for the Steelers, but I don't think he's shown enough, and they haven't actually had to rely on him yet, and they will have to rely on him. If they want to beat the Ravens, they're going to have to rely on him. And you're also going to need Broderick Jones to step it up a little bit more. I like what I've seen from McCormick in the run game a lot, but there have been issues in the pass game. I think it's getting better week by week, just a little. He's still an issue, but I don't have as many worries as I do Broderick Jones. He's the main issue that I have with that offensive line, and that's the thing. Russ, when he's facing interior pressure, you can manage that. Like he can kick it out, but when he gets pressured quickly off the edge, it's over. The play's over. He's going to either run into it or he's going to put his head down and lose 2 yards running right forward. So that is the biggest issue for me, not in the interior pressure. Obviously, it's not great, but if Broderick Jones continues to let these number 2 edges, or even number 1s if they get an unfavorable matchup, if he continues to let them by without even touching him really, it's going to be a long second half of the season.
The Steelers are a good team. I think we knew that heading into the year, that they're probably going to go 9-8 or so. They have been overperformers. Now we got to touch on a team that's been majorly underperforming, and that's the San Francisco 49ers. I think they're sitting at, 5-4 right now?
Yeah, I believe so.
That's not where they wanted to live. And
No.
After kind of a turbulent offseason, there were a lot of questions about what this team was going to look like when they began the year, and they looked disoriented and disjointed to me. But I still have belief in San Francisco because I think that they have playmakers and an excellent coaching staff on both sides of the ball. Am I wild for still thinking that this team can contend if they make the playoffs?
I don't think that's crazy, but I think the key word there is if they can make the playoffs, because right now it's looking hard in the NFC.
They do not have an easy schedule to close out the year. The NFC is a battle for the 7th spot in the wild card.
Yeah, it's like the Thunderdome out there. There are so many teams that could steal that final spot, and like you said, the Niners don't exactly have an easy schedule to close it out. I mean, they've got to go against the Seahawks this weekend, then the Packers, then the Bills, and then you got the Bears. You should win that game. Then you got the Rams, Dolphins. Those are 2 teams we're going to cover in the Alive or Dead segment. Not the Dolphins, but the Rams. And then you close out the season playing the Lions and the Cardinals. You could lose all of those games if they were played tomorrow.
They need to start winning now. Like their margin for error is done. They need to assert dominance over their division because that's not their route to just winning the division. That is, I think, their one route to even making the playoffs.
Exactly. If they don't win this division, I don't think they make the playoffs because they're going to have a better record than one of the Packers, the Vikings, or the Commanders. And
I don't see it.
I don't see the path there. Because the Commanders are 7-4 right now, unless they have a late season
Commanders
collapse.
are 7-3.
They're 7-3. Yeah, they're 7-3. Unless they have a late season collapse, it's just probably not going to happen.
Their schedule's not hard.
No, I mean they played in the NFC East and they've played the Eagles already. So, and then you got the Packers and the Vikings. They play in the NFC North. That's a tough schedule, but both of them have played the Lions once right now. So they've only got to play them one more time. And both of them have Packers have 3 losses, Vikings have 2, and they're both, in my opinion, better teams than the 49ers are at this moment in time. So the Niners really I think that Cardinals Week 18 game, if it comes down to it, if they can just be a game behind the Cardinals in Week 18, that's the goal right now. Because you win that game, you're in.
They've got to make the playoffs. But once they get there, I think they are more than just a tough out. I think they are a team nobody wants to face. And for me, it's particularly the young guys. It feels like this team is hitting on all of its draft picks. Dominic Pooney on the offensive line has been huge. Ricky Pearsall has had a Brian Robinson Jr. level response to getting shot at the beginning of the season. He looks like a playmaker for them. And then on the defensive end, Renardo Green has been excellent. You still have guys like Fred Warner, Nick Bosa, elite defensive talents. Jair Brown and Malik Mustafa have somehow been a top half safety duo. And again, you still have the Charvarius Wards and Diamador Lenores of the world. My one concern for the Niners, beyond just making the playoffs, is the pass rush. It feels like they don't have anyone beside Nick Bosa right now.
That's a fair concern because, and we'll see how that affects them this week because I don't know if they've declared Bosa out yet. But I don't think it's looking good for him. They're saying they're worried about Nick Bosa playing this week. So this is going to be a big week to tell us, all right, can we come out here and get any semblance of pressure without Bosa? Because right now, you look at it, they have the talent, and ultimately in the playoffs, when you have the talent and the coaching, things can just kind of click. We see it all the time. Teams just have a rough season. And then they get to the playoffs, and then it just clicks. And we're there, and they win the Super Bowl or something. We've seen it happen to the Chiefs multiple times already, where they'll just have a rough season, things aren't looking good, and in the playoffs, it clicks. And the Niners are a team that I feel like that absolutely could happen. But that is my big issue. You do need, in the playoffs, you need a number 2 edge, I think. When you're going up against these great teams, because all of these teams have a good offensive line. And if they don't have a good offensive line, they don't make it that far. So you need multiple ways to get pressure, and the loss of Hargrave has really hurt this team. So that is a concern. They've got Leonard Floyd as their number 2. That's not a Super Bowl number 2 edge.
No, it's not.
And then starting in the interior, we've got guys like Malik Collins, Jordan Elliott, Khalil Davis. These are guys that you want to, like, they're number 2 run defenders. They're not your number 1 pass rushers. So that's a concern, and that's something that, the trade deadline passed, they didn't address it. And then you've also got your concerns on the offensive line. Pony's played well, but Aaron Banks has been only okay. Jake Brendel's been pretty bad when he's been asked to cover someone even remotely good. And McKivitz has had his moments, especially in the pass protection, but they've run to the left a lot more for a reason, and it's because McKivitz hasn't been that great in the run game. So there are issues with this team. And it just seems like stuff isn't working. They're always a step behind. They're making stuff harder for themselves. They need to just start going downhill a little bit more, but that's going to be really tough because you have such an uphill schedule.
The mental toughness and their response to adversity is going to be the determining factor in how far they go. We've seen the juggernaut that this San Francisco team can be, what they've been in years past, and then they get to the playoffs and they just can't quite get over the hump. There's a world where the scary, slow start turns into something of a positive for them because they come in with a better understanding of how to deal with adversity, the understanding that their window is closing. Obviously, you have Brock Purdy, but you're running out of time to pay these guys. I think they have pieces like Trent Williams that are getting up there in age. The Niners need to win now if they want to expand this Trent Williams, George Kittle type of window. I'm fascinated to see where it goes from here. And if they lose this game against Seattle, they're not dead, but they are on life support at 5-5.
Absolutely. This is a must-win for them. And if you watch the prediction episode, you know that we have conflicting opinions on whether they will win this game or not. But if they do win this game, things are looking okay. It's not we're not there yet. We still got a long way to go, but it's possible. If you don't, you got to do some serious soul searching because this may be your last chance.
An understated factor in how far the 49ers could go in the playoffs is whether or not they play our next team, the Green Bay Packers. For the uninitiated, I'm a Packers fan, and so I know what you're thinking. The Packers should be the Super Bowl favorites. Green Bay is the best. I think we're pretenders this year.
Really?
Really. Here's a little thought experiment. Tell me the Packers, except for the two safeties, Xavier McKinney and Evan Williams, who have been excellent, who are having better than expected seasons.
Well, we talked about Javon Bullard.
That's true. Javon Bullard has been good.
See, that's a tough question. I mean, you look at the offensive line. Zach Tom's playing better, but he was playing good last season. So, I think Elgton's played well, but again, he's met expectations because those were the expectations for Elgton Jenkins. Adrian Cooper.
The names that I came up with, besides Bullard, who, he's kind of a safety in his own right, I guess the team figured out the safety room after the issues that we had last season.
Which is funny because I thought they lit those picks on fire in the draft.
100%. Production never comes from exactly where you expect, I suppose. Jaden Reed has been a slot weapon.
Yeah.
Zach Tom has taken a step up, and Adrian Cooper has been maybe a little bit better than expected in a rotational role. You look at the rest of the offensive line, I mean, Sean Ryan has been largely what we expected. Josh Myers looks like one of the worst starting centers in football.
It's bad.
The defensive line has been abysmal. I think Rashawn Gary is having the worst season of his career. Lucas Van Ness has a sub-5 pressure rate. Devontae Wyatt isn't making his presence felt. The linebacker room, Quay Walker looks terrible to me, and Isaiah McDuffie looks like not a starter. Eric Stokes has been in and out of the lineup, not just with injuries, but with being benched on a few occasions because he's just that loose in coverage. And Jordan Love, who is obviously, it's cliche to say the quarterback is the X factor for a team, what determines how far they go. I don't think that's more true anywhere but Green Bay.
No,
this was going to be about, do you get early season 2023 Jordan Love or late season 2023 Jordan Love? I think we've got something in between. However, he's certainly been more towards the disappointing end of the spectrum.
Absolutely. And we'll see if he improves that on the season because there are absolutely some quarterbacks who just start slow. But at this point, it's not a start. It's been 10 weeks of the season. You've played 9 games, and you've had your moments, but he got a big contract, and he needs to start playing up to it. But there is a lot of quarterbacks who the latter third quarter of the third trimester of the season and the playoffs, they just lock in, and that's kind of what happened to Jordan Love last year. But there definitely needs to be, I feel like there's no urgency with this team right now. Like, I feel like they know they're going to probably be in the playoffs. We're probably going to be there, so let's just coast the regular season. But whenever teams have that mentality, it's okay, we're going to make the playoffs, so why should, well, obviously, they're playing hard, they're NFL players, they're playing for their jobs, but the mentality may not be 100% there, that every game is a must-win game. So when you've got something like that, when it comes time to play the playoffs, it's kind of hard to get out of that mentality. It's kind of hard to play like your entire life depends on it, So I just, especially with Jordan Love, I want to see him putting it all out there. I'm not saying that he's not. It's just, I feel like there's something missing here, and they need to figure out what it is if they want a chance to go far. But I agree with you. I think right now they're pretenders. As it stands right now, they've got to change something, though. But the good thing is, you've got Matt LaFleur as your head coach, and I think if there's someone who can identify a weakness and potentially make it better, he is one of those guys that I'd really trust to do it. So he needs to kick this team into higher gear, and we need to feel something.
I think the Packers are a good team. I think they're well coached. I think that they have good players. But when I'm looking at if a team can become a true Super Bowl contender, where are the guys that we can project overperformance from? Who are the guys who are going to step up? Rashawn Gary, maybe. Jair Alexander's still largely doing his thing, but you still have a young group of wide receivers. You still, in large part, have a young group of linebackers and defensive backs, a really unproven defensive line, and an offensive line with some holes in it. There are some teams like the Steelers, who we touched on earlier, where they have players who could turn it on, and now this team is the real deal. I still feel like the Packers are a little bit too young to realistically go all the way.
That's fair, and I think if they want that, they also need like Valentine and Ballantyne, Corey and Carrington. They stepped up last year in the playoffs, and you need another kind of season from them. I think it'd be nice if Jacob Monk, the backup there, they drafted him last year, if he could show you something enough to be like, I'm going to take Myers' role and I'm just going to play okay. You know, maybe Dontavian Wicks doesn't suck. Like, he was playing real well for like 2 or 3 weeks, and then he sucked for the rest of the week. You know, maybe you see Tucker Kraft take a midseason step. That could be massive. If he takes another step, he could be a serious threat that everyone has to game plan for. I think there are ways the Packers can push into potential contender territory, but in a stacked NFC, just overall a really top-heavy year for the league, I have a hard time pegging them as a real contender.
I would love to see those kind of next steps up from the Packers players, because I think when this team is good, it is a very fun team to watch, and ultimately, we can talk about all the auxiliary playmakers that we need to see improvement from. It comes down to Jordan Love.
It absolutely does. He needs to play like the $55 million man. He needs to play like the franchise, because he is the franchise right now, and he is Green Bay, and he needs to go out there and he needs to step up.
Now we'll talk about another team with an ascending young quarterback that started the year out real hot. Looks like they've taken a little bit of a step back due to some injuries. Are the Houston Texans contenders or pretenders?
This, when we were preparing for this episode, this was by far my toughest team. The Steelers were a close second, and then another team that we are going to get to was also tough for me. But this is by far my toughest one, because you've got C.J. Stroud, man. This is a guy that no matter what, I feel like you should be contending if you have a QB like that. And the team that we saw in the beginning of the season is just so good. Nico Collins, he'll be back this week. So we'll see if he has lost a step with the injury or if he's fully back. This defense, when it's firing on all cylinders, is top 3, top 5 in the league. This is a great receiving core when everybody's healthy, but not everybody's healthy. Diggs is out. Diggs is out for the season. Collins, he got hurt, and that kind of injury can bug somebody. I think it was a hamstring, right? Or it was a high ankle sprain?
I believe so.
Yeah, high ankle sprain, that can bother you. I mean, if you were a Julio Jones fantasy owner for any time, you know that high ankle sprain can really bother somebody for an entire season. So right now with the Texans, I'd love to say they're contenders, because I think when they're at their best, they are contenders. But ultimately, not every team is always at their best. I think they've taken too many losses, too many hits. I think they're pretenders, and I just have a hard time projecting them to win the AFC right now.
Think about the players that this team has, and it's not just Nico Collins and C.J. Stroud. Their connection is easily top 5 in the NFL, and even with Collins coming back from injury, I think it's hard to get off of that connection that they have together, because Nico Collins is a guy who's open even when he's covered, so even if the athleticism loses a step, which you got to imagine he can get that back, that's still going to be a deadly combination. But you have Joe Mixon in a run game that can be good. You have Tank Dell, who's been as advertised, I think, after we saw a promising season for him last year. Derek Stingley has been lights out. He is an ascending young corner, and this edge rush duo of Will Anderson and Danielle Hunter has been exactly as we expected. It's just so difficult for me to rule out a team that has a quarterback with an elite trust target who's become a top 10, I think, easily receiver in the NFL with what he's shown over the last 2 years. A good secondary with a player that can hang on an island. Jalen Petrie helps with that as well. He has been a baller in his second season. And then a pass rush that is severely limiting your opponent's time to throw. It feels like they have a lot of getting healthy to do. I'm worried about this team's overall run defense, but I just can't rule them out when they check that many boxes.
That's totally fair, and that's why it was so tough for me. But ultimately, I think my biggest factor when it came down to it was a guy that has gotten so much praise this season, and I think it's deserved. But I think the type of offense that Bobby Slowick likes to run, and the way that he's been calling this team, especially how he's been utilizing C.J. Stroud's skill set, I don't think it will translate to the big games. Because when you look at what games has Houston won this year, like when they've played the big teams, they've lost usually. I mean, they lost to the Packers, they lost to the Jets, like they lost to the Lions, who threw 5 picks. Now they weren't healthy. They've looked good against bad teams, which is something that you absolutely need to be able to do. You need to be able to look good against bad teams. But they got killed by the Vikings. That is still very fresh in my mind, even though it was a long time ago. They got killed by the Vikings. And I think that game really showed my biggest problem with this team is that I don't think this is necessarily... I think this is an offensive scheme that works best when everything's firing on all cylinders. But in the playoffs, things are going to get tough. And I don't know if Slowick necessarily has the experience or the offensive scheme to adjust to all the things that, like, all the great DCs are going to throw at you. Spagnuolo, McDermott, you're going to have to play them in the playoffs. They're going to throw a lot at you. And then you also pair that with the fact that I don't trust this offensive line in pass protection. Laramie Tunsil has taken multiple steps back this year. Kenyon Green, I don't believe he's starting anymore.
He's out of the starting lineup, thank God.
Now we got Kendrick Green in. He's only okay. I like Juice Scruggs more than the next guy, but he's still a guy that I wouldn't put full trust in. Titus Howard, I don't think I'm ever going to trust that guy fully to protect Stroud. And it seems like the way that Slowick is running this offense and the way the Shanahan offense runs, period, is that there's not much room for the quarterback to make pre-snap adjustments on the offensive line. You're not going to see the quarterback change these protections often. So I think that leads to a lot more missed, unblocked guys coming right at you. And we saw that against the Vikings, where Flores just let guys loose. There was so much motion on the defensive line, and these guys could not hang. And Stroud, the offensive scheme failed him. So I think this is such a hard team to rule out, and it feels so bad. They're 51% pretender, 49% contender. But if this team makes the Super Bowl, I won't be that surprised, because ultimately C.J. Stroud, Nico Collins, Joe Mixon, Will Anderson, Daniil Hunter, Derek Stingley, D'Amico Ryans is the head coach. It's so tough to rule that out.
I do think it goes back to the offensive line, because it's not just the pass protection. What C.J. Stroud has done while running for his life, sure, he might not be putting up the elite stats in the box
He's been great
score.
under pressure.
He has been an exceptional quarterback this year, but it's also in establishing that run game. It feels like they rely on C.J. Stroud to walk such a fine line and hit all these tight window throws, and that's just a really tough way to live in the playoffs if you can't get a run game going that's going to suck the linebackers in every play and make life easier for your quarterback.
The thing is, it's most quarterbacks, I'd feel bad if that's your offense. You're forcing them to, like, this is the guy that you just have to be perfect. I think you can put that trust on C.J. Stroud.
He can do it a lot of the time.
Absolutely, he can do it. And Stroud, he's one of those guys that this team is probably ultimately going to come down to. If he goes Super Saiyan mode in the playoffs, you've got a chance. So when your offense is this reliant on your quarterback being perfect, sometimes you will lose those big games. Sometimes you'll have the games like the Vikings, where C.J. Stroud wasn't necessarily perfect. He was under pressure the entire game. But if C.J. Stroud gets hot at the right moment, and if this defense gets hot at the right moment, oh boy, we could be in for a treat in the playoffs.
You can't rule him out.
Absolutely not.
Ascending young rookie quarterbacks have been a theme so far. So let's get into a team with a damn good one. That is the Washington Commanders and Jaden Daniels. I've had some strong takes on Washington. Victor, I want yours first.
I think I know what you're gonna say, and I think I'm agreeing. I think we both think that this is a pretender team. That
the roster's not talented enough. It's just not. We're starting to see it.
No, I mean we saw the game Thursday night against the Eagles. It was technically a one-possession game. They got throttled. That run defense couldn't stop them they can't stop them at all. And ultimately, if you're going to be a contender, you're probably going to have to beat the Eagles. You're probably going to have to beat the Lions. Guess what? Those guys have some of the best run games in the league. And it isn't just the run game, though. That is probably the biggest hole on this roster, the lack of the run defense. It cannot be overstated how much they're missing John Allen. But ultimately, Jaden Daniels is a rookie. And rookies you don't contend with a rookie. I know Jaden Daniels he's thrown off every possible presumption of what we thought about rookies, but still you cannot contend with a rookie when you don't have just an elite supporting cast around him.
He's looked increasingly mortal in recent weeks,
True.
and I'm not going to be throwing shit at Jaden Daniels. I'm not putting that on him. I wasn't expecting him to look superhuman this year. I think we're seeing a lot of regression back to the mean against better defensive fronts from this Commanders offensive line that we did not have high expectations for coming into the year. I think you can bottle up the passing attack a little bit when you bracket Terry McLaurin, because look at who the secondary pass catchers are. Noah Brown, who's, I guess, solid wide receiver 4, should not be a wide receiver 2. De'Ami Brown, who's good for 2 long catches a season and about 3 long drops a season. And then, the converted quarterback who's in the slot that they drafted, McCaffrey, Christian's brother.
He's
he
been
looks
solid.
raw.
But yeah, he's there are a lot of issues. At least he's got decent hands. That's all I'll say. But there have been some.
He does have good hands, but he doesn't separate very
No,
consistently.
that's the problem. So it's like he's good for a couple nice catches a game, but you can't rely on him at all.
I think the reason that this Washington offense looked world-beating to start the year is because they were able to establish such a strong run game. And when you look at who they played early on in the season, I think you can chalk just as much of that up to bad front sevens that they're going up against versus, this is authentically a top 10 run game in the NFL. I think now that you strip that away, like we saw against Philadelphia, this is a different, still good version of the Commanders' offense. Jaden Daniels is still an exceptional quarterback, I think, but I don't think this is a Super Bowl caliber offense, and the defense just isn't going to get it done.
No, it isn't, because we talked about the run defense, but also the pass defense isn't that much better. Benjamin St. Juste is probably the worst corner in football, maybe the worst corner I've seen in a long time.
I think he's tied for the league lead in yards allowed this season.
It's just pathetic, really. And then on the other side, it doesn't really get much better. You know what I mean? You do have, so you got Noah Igbenogany. He was starting right then. But you just brought in Marshawn Lattimore. That gives me some hope for this team.
I think Igbenogany keeps starting. I think Juste goes to the bench.
That makes sense because Juste, but the thing is, I don't necessarily know that Juste is worse than Igbenogany because people have been targeting Benjamin St. Juste a lot. So that's why he's looked so terrible. And he has been very bad. But I don't think he's been awful when it comes to downfield coverage because ultimately he understands, all right, I'm just not as good. I think he understands I'm not the best corner in the league. So what am I going to go out there and going to do? I'm going to use my size. I'm going to force him towards the sideline. I'm just going to make it a tough catch. If they make the catch, good on them. George Pickens made a couple of those catches. But he ultimately, there's just going to be less deep targets where he gets burned on. Noah Igbenogany is getting fried deep. Like, you look at Pittsburgh, he got beat 4 or 5 times deep. Russell Wilson didn't always find him, but they were there, and Igbenogany is okay. He's below average in the short game and just straight up awful in the long game. So you've got basically nobody there. At least Mike Sanders still is looking nice. Maybe you throw him at outside corner, but it's a bad pass defense too.
Sanders still has actually been a huge pleasant surprise because he is one of their starting perimeter corners right now. We expected him to be a slot guy. They've tried to plug Igbenogany in there, and it has not worked. Marshawn Lattimore is going to help this defense out. When they brought in Marshawn Lattimore, I did start taking the Commanders a lot more seriously. But ultimately, you're still either starting Benjamin St. Juste or Noah Igbenogany. They don't exactly have a keep the top on the defense every single play automatically type of safety room. I like the Commanders. I think they're fun. Contrary to popular belief, I do not hate Washington. I just don't think this is the year for them quite yet.
I agree, and I also think there is a Cliff Kingsbury problem. You know, we talked about him a lot in the early season, but I think this is just kind of what Cliff Kingsbury does. He runs a good offense for the first half of the season and then just collapses because he can't adjust once defenses figure out what he wants to do. And it was such a big high this season because Jaden Daniels is the real deal. So people were not expecting everything that he would throw at them with an elite rookie quarterback like Jaden Daniels. But now that people are starting to figure out, okay, this is who Jaden Daniels is as a quarterback, it's still hard to stop him, but we can at least put these things in to make it make him look more mortal, as you said. Cliff Kingsbury just is not cutting it as the OC, and I like what Dan Quinn's done as the head coach of this team. I like what he's done with this defense. It's overperforming right now, and I think you can attribute a lot of it to Dan Quinn, but I still don't believe Dan Quinn's a Super Bowl winning head coach. So, Commanders, it's a fun story. It's a fun team. We love Jaden Daniels. So fun to watch. I just don't think this is the year.
It's wait and see for me with Cliff because you got to consider that, sure, the offense is tailed off, but Washington has, 4 good players on offense, and
It's
2
true.
of them are probably running backs. They're going to be fascinating to watch next year, and I'm looking forward to that, but ultimately I don't think we see them go very far in the playoffs. All right, now we've got another ascending young quarterback, that, of course, being Sam Darnold and the Minnesota Vikings. This is a team that I like a lot. I'm so impressed by what they do from a coaching and scheming perspective. I don't think they have the wheels to go far in the postseason.
I think I'm right there with you. I think it's weird to label a 7-2 team pretenders, but I think that's what I'm going to do. You look at this team, I think this is one of the most extreme cases of how much coaching can raise the floor. You look at what Kevin O'Connell's doing with this offense. You look at what Brian Flores is doing with this defense. It has just been 2 of the best coaching jobs. If O'Connell wins Coach of the Year and Flores wins Assistant Coach of the Year, both are well-deserved. But then you actually get down to it. You look at this roster. You look at this talent. You look at how these guys have been playing when when they haven't been protected by the scheme. It hasn't been great. It's not been bad. You've had a lot of great players that were like, okay, they're playing a lot better than we thought. I just don't think that this is necessarily the talent to go all the way. And I think when it gets to the playoffs, you're going to play too many teams that just have more talent than you and have similarly genius play callers.
I love Minnesota's defense. I think it experiences a drop-off against good offenses with good offensive lines and veteran quarterbacks that aren't fooled necessarily by what Brian Flores is putting out there. Again, I still think this is a good unit. I think it's going to limit good opposing offenses. But, man, I just can't see Sam Darnold stringing together 4 good weeks and taking this team to the Super Bowl.
No, and I think you hit the nail on the head. Veteran quarterbacks have really exposed this team. Jared Goff dropped 31 on their head, and Stafford went there for 30. And I think also Flores, whenever he realizes this, okay, these guys have kind of got me down, he starts to cool off on the blitzes a little bit, doesn't bring as many of them, and that makes it harder to really not only to get pressure on the quarterback, so when the quarterback has more time to throw, that'll expose some of the flaws in the secondary, because I do like how some of these guys have played, but ultimately your starting cornerbacks are Byron Murphy, there's Stephon Gilmore, there's Josh Metellus, all of those guys have had their issues this season. So I really like props to all that Minnesota's done, but Sam Darnold, he's ascending young quarterback, but he's also descending pretty quickly right now. Hopefully he can get back up there, but he's not a guy that I believe can, even if he could string 4 weeks together, I'd have questions if they were contenders. I don't think he can.
I think we're in agreement on the Vikes. And the last team we're going to discuss as a potential contender or pretender is the overperforming Los Angeles Chargers. What a flip in the tone and the culture of this team with Jim Harbaugh as head coach. I'm just going to go out and say it. I'm calling them pretenders.
Yeah.
I don't think they have the roster talent yet, especially when you look at the secondary and the pass catchers. But, man, they made me think about it way, way more than I thought this team possibly could, because you've got Justin Herbert with a good pair of tackles, just a physical and well-coached team on both sides of the ball. Khalil Mack and Joey Bosa look like vintage Khalil Mack and Joey Bosa, even if they're both dealing with some health issues. This is a scary team. This is not a team I want to run into in the postseason.
Absolutely not. And yeah, I've got them as pretenders too, but I think it's a win they're on this list in the first place. Just being here just shows how much Jim Harbaugh has changed the culture in year 1, how well this team has played, how good they look as a team, as a unit. There are a lot of teams that we've talked about so far where you feel like, okay, they've got the talent, they've got a lot of the individuals, but they haven't come together as a team. This is a unit. This is one team, and I love what I'm seeing. And I think they're pretenders this year, but with the way they're playing right now, when we do this list next year, don't be surprised if they're contenders, all right?
I'm so excited to see if they can hang with the Bengals this Sunday against a high-flying passing offense. We're going to learn so much about what their ceiling is as a unit.
Absolutely. Who's got it better than us, right? Harbaugh's brought that mentality. Their run game has been on and off, but I think that's been relatively consistent. They've been able to put out good performances. Herbert's playing at the top of his game. You just get some more targets for Herbert to work with. He can do it with these guys, but get him some guys who can get open consistently, get some talent in that secondary, and next year could be really fun.
Add a couple pieces to the interior O-line, and the rushing attack goes from the 16th best in the league to the 8th or so. Oh man, this could be scary. This is a deep running back class. This isn't the draft talk that we got into at the beginning of the podcast, but man, if there's ever a year to get a bell cow running back in, say, the late second round, watch out.
Ooh, yeah. And you know what? Underrated part of this team is there's a lot of young guys here. Like, you look at it, Lad McConkey is on pace for 1,000 yards right now, and this is his first season. I mean, and then you got the inside on the O-line, Joe Alt playing like a Pro Bowler right now. He's a rookie. He could get better. He can become All-Pro status. You know, you still got young guys, Zion Johnson, Jamari Sallier, I believe both entering their third year. There's still room for them to take a step up. I like Jordan McFadden coming into the draft. He hasn't played much, but... And then on the defense, full of young guys. Asante Samuel injured right now, but hopefully when he comes back, he'll look good. Cam Hart, Tarheeb Still, both rookies who have been playing well. You got a pair of good play callers. It's just looking up for the Chargers. What a turnaround.
Tuli Tuipulotu is an additional
Yeah.
pass rusher. Quentin Johnston looks like he might be a starter.
It's
There
not
is
over.
there is good reason to be bullish on this Chargers team. So those were some teams on the Super Bowl contention bubble. Now we're going to dive into some teams on the playoff bubble and get into whether or not their season is still afloat, whether they still have anything to play for. The first team I want to get into, again, these are kind of ranked by how good the teams are perceived to be. I think you see even less of a tier divide in this group.
Oh, yeah.
I want to talk about the Rams first, and Victor, I think they're dead because they are in an uber competitive NFC West division, and they still have to play Philadelphia, Buffalo, Arizona, and Seattle. I just can't see it.
Yeah, that's fair because ultimately, when you look at contenders and pretenders, these are teams that have at least 6 wins. All of them except for San Francisco had at least 6 wins. So as long as if they are indeed contenders, they won't have a difficult path to the playoffs. Right now, these teams have dug themselves into a little bit of a hole. So schedule does actually matter here. Whether I believe that the Rams have the quality to make the playoffs if they were playing a league average schedule, I'm not sure about that. But with they're playing this schedule, with the team they're fielding right now, I think they're dead too. Because I like what they're doing. I like their players. I obviously we love Stafford, we love Nakua, we love Cup, but ultimately after that, it gets hard to find positives on this team. Kyron Williams has been solid. He's Kyron Williams, but he's not like Saquon Barkley or anything. You know what I mean? This offensive line has been average.
The line's the biggest problem for me. It feels like Stafford doesn't have enough time to attack downfield, and Kyron Williams is a very vision. He needs holes opened up for him, dependent running back. And when that's not there, he's still going to maybe drag defenders for an extra 2 yards, but he is not a takeover sort of force.
Absolutely, yeah. Like they've been average when healthy, but they've struggled with health issues because there's just a lot of older guys on this offensive line, or specifically the tackle position. Noteboom and Havenstein have struggled to stay on the field, and then you've got your interior guys like Steve Avila, Bo Limmer, younger guys who have struggled with their consistency issues. Two bigger guys like to play the power game. They've been kind of beaten by some of those smaller, quicker interior guys. And then you look on the defense, again, it's the same thing where there's just not many guys that you can point to, and that's a guy I can rely on every week to come out there and play good football. Maybe we can say, okay, I trust Kobe Turner to be consistent, but other than that, I don't see a room. I don't see a single position group for the Rams that is a plus position group.
I like the pass rush. I think what Jared Verse is doing is borderline special, and I think that they have good interior pass rushers as well, specifically some of the stuff they do with looping and stunting. I just don't see it holding up against really good offensive lines that I think are going to buy enough time to beat them over top.
Especially because they've got a lot of tough teams in the schedule. They've got a lot of teams that know how to pass the football, a lot of receivers that are going to be able to get open against these okay DBs. So even if you're able to get pressure at like the 11th best rate in the league, if your DBs are letting guys get separation pretty much instantly, that's not going to cut it. And whenever they've got a lot of good quarterbacks on the schedule, Purdy, Allen, Rodgers, Murray, Geno, these guys are going to be able to deal with the pressure. So I think they're dead. I think the playoff hopes, if they were in the NFC South, maybe, but it's the NFC West. I don't see a legitimate path right now.
So now we're going to stay in the NFC West and talk about a team with the exact same record. It's the Seattle Seahawks, and I think they're alive because they play Arizona twice. I think that we're going to see some serious NFC West cannibalism go on. I think they got to win the division, and I don't think they're going to, but I think there's a universe where they do, and that's the route to the playoffs.
I agree. I think they're alive in the way that, I don't know, this is a football podcast. None of you listen to Dungeons and Dragons. None of you play Dungeons and Dragons, but in the way that you get knocked down and you've got 3 chances to roll the dice to get back up, and if you fail all of them, you're dead. They've got a slim chance, and they have to basically be perfect. They have to I think they have to win out, or they have to either win out or go 3-1 in the NFC West if they want a shot at the playoffs. And that one of those wins, and you have to beat the Cardinals once. It would help to beat them twice. I'd say you have to beat the Cardinals on December 8th. I think you do, because they play the Cardinals twice. If you beat them the second time and you tie with them for the division, then you're in the playoff, because that's how that works. But there's no path to a wild card spot because you also have to play the Pack and the Vikings. So you're going to have to be really perfect. Mike McDonald's got to show that this defense can be really, when they're healthy, because they've struggled with their health issues, but they're healthy now. What do you have as a head coach that can make us believe that you are right for this job? What can this defense do to go out there? They need to go out there and need to be a plus defense for the last half of the year. Geno Smith needs to channel MVP Geno, and DK has to get his head out of his ass, because what is he doing right now? So everything needs to go right for the Seahawks, but I think it could, and that's why I'm saying there's a sliver of hope. They're not dead yet.
The reason that I still think this team is alive, it's not just because they play the Cardinals twice. That more enables them to theoretically be alive. The reason that I think that they could actually pull this off, it is essentially because of Mike McDonald. I think that this team has a better version of themselves that they haven't reached yet. I think that they're performing below their talent level. This should be a really good secondary. They have a decent pass rush. They should have a multifaceted offense where they're vertical, they can attack underneath, they can run the ball with Kenneth Walker and do some fun receiving stuff with Zach Charbonnet, and we just haven't seen everything clicking on all cylinders yet. I think there's a version of this team that's really effective. They need to turn it on right now.
Yeah, absolutely. And there's a lot of young guys on this defense that if they can take that step forward, it would really help him, especially in that edge room. You've got a lot of electric athletes in there that haven't necessarily separated. None of them have necessarily separated themselves as the number one guy. I think the guy who's come closest is Derek Hall. He's had a pretty good season. If he can take a step up towards the latter half of the season, that'd be nice. Devin Witherspoon's been good this season. I don't think he's been elite, right? Like we thought that he could be coming out of the draft. I'm not saying that he can't be. It would be nice for him to take that step up. It's just like I feel like a lot of these guys, they've shown promise, and they might take the leap next year when it's too late to make the playoffs this year.
Next up, we have the most common alive or dead conversation in the NFL media landscape, and that's the Cincinnati Bengals. And Victor, in the AFC wildcard race, unlike the NFC wildcard race, which is essentially walled off with some really good teams stuck in good divisions, the AFC wildcard race is still open. The two teams they're trying to catch are the Chargers or the Broncos. Both teams have reasonably tough schedules. Both teams play each other quite a bit. I think the Bengals can beat anyone. They don't have the defense to necessarily go far in the playoffs. I do think that kind of puts a hard ceiling on them because let's face it, Joe Burrow isn't just going to go out there and be dramatically better than everyone 4 weeks in a row. He could do it 3.
Yeah,
He
I
could
think
do it
so.
2. And that's why I think they have a chance because they can drop 35 on almost any team in the NFL just sheerly based off will and white hot quarterbacking rage. I think they're alive.
So do I. I think they are probably the most alive team on this list, and it's just because I disagree. I think the Chargers are in. I don't think their spot is open. I think there's one spot in the AFC wild card. I think the Steelers or the Ravens, whoever doesn't win the AFC North, they'll be the 5, and the Chargers will probably be the 6. The 7 seed is either going to be honestly, I think it's either going to be the Broncos or the Bengals at this point. I know that's kind of crazy to say in week 11 that there's only 8 teams in reasonable play.
No, I agree.
Because you look at the other teams who possibly could do it. The Colts,
Nope.
they're not on the alive or dead segment for a reason. We both agreed that they were pretty dead.
That's a bad football team.
Yeah, they're not there. The Dolphins, they're not on the alive or dead segment for a reason too.
They need to be utterly flawless
And
to
I-
end the year, and I don't think there's a version of that team that can do it.
If this team starts from the beginning, I think they could compete for that spot, but they're not starting from the beginning. They're, I believe, 3-6 right now.
Yes.
3-7, one of those two. And then, oh man, you've got the Broncos, who that is their biggest That is their biggest.
Hey, don't forget the Jets.
They've got the Broncos. That's their biggest difficulty. The Jets are also not on alive or dead for well-documented reasons. If you want to hear what we think about the Jets, go listen to the episode that released yesterday, Week 11 predictions. We talked about their game against the Colts at length and why both of those teams probably don't have the best chance for the playoffs. But it's ultimately going to come down to the Broncos or the Bengals, and the Broncos have an average schedule. There is room. The point is, there's absolutely room for the Bengals to get back in, especially because they play the Broncos. They play them in Week 17. So if they can win that game, they're absolutely in it. Now you look at this team, what's been lacking, it's been the defense. But there have been some points in the season where we've seen something from the defense. And if we can just get a little bit more of that. We know how good Joe Burrow is. He's playing at an MVP level right now. We know how good Jamar Chase is. He's a top 5 receiver in the league. They're getting T. Higgins back this week. Another underrated thing, they're getting Orlando Brown back this week. He was really good for the first part of the season. Then he got hurt, and they had to put in, oh man, I don't even remember who was in at left tackle. Wasn't it it was Cody Ford from he used to be a Cardinal. He was not good. He was not. So they've been kind of lacking at left tackle. Burrow's been under more pressure, and that has also affected the run game because they liked to run the ball to the left outside zone with Chase Brown to the left with Orlando Brown, and he was kind of able to wall that off. They haven't been able to do that with Cody Ford in the lineup, so that's an underrated addition. This team, as you said, I think they can beat anybody. They were 2 plays away. They're 3 plays away from being 6-3 right now with wins over the Chiefs and 2 wins over the Ravens. They've been just a few plays away every game. The defense has cost them. The special teams have cost them. Ultimately, I think Burrow can will this team there. There are absolutely signs of life here. And the Bengals can still make the playoffs because when you've got Joe Burrow, when you've got Jamar Chase, when you've got T. Higgins, anything's possible.
Bengals versus Broncos in Week 17 is going to be the most fun game between 500 caliber teams of the season.
Oh, yeah. It's not going to be fun for me, but I'm going to be... listen, I'm hoping the Bengals don't make the playoffs, of course. And listen, if you have fun watching your favorite team play football, are you doing it right? Like, I don't think you're doing it right.
Oh, no way. I hate the NFL.
Yeah, like when I'm watching the Broncos, I don't think I hate life more. Right? It's awful.
I topple my TV at least once a week.
Exactly. We're just bam, bam. I was really close whenever that kick got blocked. I really was. But that Week 17 game might be the highest leverage point of the AFC wild card at any point this season.
I completely agree. And lastly, we have the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, who I think are also 4-6. This is a team a lot of people are assuming is dead. Chris Godwin is done for the season. Mike Evans still probably a couple weeks away from returning. They have a path. Victor, do you have their schedule by chance?
Yeah.
Read it off, please.
Okay. They have 7 more games in order: the Giants, the Panthers, the Raiders, the Chargers, the Cowboys, the Panthers, and the Saints.
There is a very realistic world where they go 6-1 through those games.
Absolutely, because you look at the Buccaneers, maybe they're not the best team without Evans and Godwin. They're better than those teams.
100% they are. They're not going to make the wild card. No doubt about that. It's closed off for them in the NFC. But I think they have a real chance to play spoiler to the Falcons and steal the division lead. Now, it's going to be tough because the Falcons went 2-0 against the Bucs in 2 big games, but I am not sold on Atlanta. I think that the Buccaneers are hungry and pissed off, and I think there's a world where Atlanta experiences a late season collapse.
Absolutely, because you look at who they're playing. Their next 3 weeks, they've got 3 top 10 defense, and we've talked about Atlanta. They don't play well against good defenses. They've got the Broncos, they've got the Chargers, they've got the Vikings. All incredible defenses. The Falcons could be 6-7 by the time the Raiders roll around, and then after that, they've got the Raiders, they've got the Giants, they've got the Commanders, and they've got the Panthers. And I think you could theoretically go 3-1 there. Then you're 9-8. If the Bucs go 6-1, they're 10-7. Guess what? The Bucs are in the playoffs. So there is absolutely a path for Tampa Bay. And we considered putting Atlanta on the alive or dead, but they're 6-4. They're alive. But the simple fact is the Bucs are alive because of one man. The white hot rage of Baker Mayfield is keeping them in it. And we thought that maybe he would kind of collapse when he doesn't have his 2 trust targets in Evans and Godwin. Nope, he's still here. He's playing with shit receivers, but he didn't hear no bell. Baker's willing this team to keep them alive. Maybe they're not. Are they as alive as the Bengals? No, but it's like the Seahawks. There's a sliver. There's some light at the end of the tunnel. There's something you can cling to, and something about this Buccaneers team makes me feel like I feel like the Buccaneers are always a team that is, you just can't ever count them out. When they had Brady, when they had Jameis, they just always gave everything they had, and I think that stands true for the Baker and Todd Bowles rendition of the Buccaneers. I won't count them out in the playoff race. I think there's still a chance.
Baker definitely lost some precision when he lost Evans and Godwin. He's putting the ball in harm's way more often, but that precision has been replaced by just sheer anger. Like, it's not just stiff-arming Nick Bosa. It's not just making tough plays and lowering his shoulder and moving the chains with his legs, doing gutsy stuff out of structure. In the last game, I'm pretty sure that he was actually on the field as a 12th man. I think he forced a fumble or something. He just said, "Give me that!" He knocked the ball out, he picked it up, and he got his team back on offense. The will of Baker is keeping this team alive. I haven't always been the hugest Baker apologist. I want to see him make the playoffs. Even if they lose first round, I think it would be a ton of fun.
Absolutely, because you know Baker's going to give somebody some issues. Baker in a playoff game is just so fun. We saw it last year. It's just so fun. And you know what? He's having to throw more guys open because realistically he's having to throw to Ryan Miller, Jalen McMillan, Sterling Shepard, Raheem Jarrett, Trey Palmer. It's just bad. At least he has Sterling Shepard, trust target from their OU days, but it is. Evans could come back by the end of the season, and if they do make the playoffs, he'll be back. So that's nice. Maybe you get him back for the last 3 weeks, that last push. That would be helpful. Don't think they're dead yet.
The concept of a wide receiver 5 is supposed to be it's your 5th receiver, not that you have 5 of them. But all jokes aside, this team does have some unrealized defensive upside. They have good players. Yaya Diaby is having a good season. Vita Vea is still Vita Vea. Zion McCollum has been having a really good year overall. With Todd Bowles, they could turn it on. They could go 6-1. There is a singular universe where they go 7-0 down the stretch. They get Mike Evans back. They maybe win a playoff game in the first round. I'm talking up the Bucs too much. I know that, but I think they're fun, and I think as of now, they're still alive. We've talked about good teams. We've talked about okay teams. Now it's time to talk about some really bad teams. We're going to be discussing the head coach seat temperature index. Who's staying put next season? Who's getting fired on Black Monday? Who's maybe not even going to make it to that point? There are a couple of coaches that I wanted to just chat a little bit about beforehand that I think are safe, so we're not going to talk too much about them. Mike McDaniel with the Dolphins. I think you got to write this season off in a lot of ways.
Yeah. Like, there are issues with McDaniel, but they're not going to fire him.
No, not after Tua gets hurt and it wrecks the entire offense.
No way. Especially after they went 11-6 last season. It's just
exactly. Kevin Stefanski. The Browns are 2-7. I think you can chalk a lot of that up to a different guy with a lot of power in the organization.
Yeah, I don't think this is Stefanski's fault. Maybe they end up scapegoating him a year from now, but it won't be this year.
I sure hope not. I think he's a good coach.
So do I.
And then Brian Callahan with the 2-7 Titans, he gets next year.
No, yeah, you don't fire a coach after 1 year unless it's an all-time bad coaching job like a Meyer or a Hackett. I don't think Callahan's been that bad, so I think he gets another year at least.
Or unless it's sort of a scapegoat interim guy, and I don't think Callahan is that.
No.
All right, so we have 7 coaches to talk about, whether or not they're going to be staying put or out the door. And I ranked them by record, so the first guy to talk about is Matt Eberflus with the 4-5 Bears.
So Eberflus is a tough one for me because obviously something's wrong in Chicago. There's a lot of talk about his seat. I think his seat's warm. I don't think it's necessarily red hot. Now, I don't think he's... I think he might be fired by the end of the season if the Bears just continue being terrible without Waldron. But we have to figure out how much of it was Waldron, how much of it was Eberflus just kind of wrecking this team, which I think he's not a bad head coach, right?
He's gotten the defense right, I think. I think he's doing what he was brought in to do. Ultimately, I do think he gets scapegoated. I think there's a certain ceiling that having a defensive head coach puts on your organization, especially if they're not truly an elite defensive mind, and I don't think that's what Eberflus is. I don't think he gets fired midseason. I think what decides whether or not he stays or goes is how this offense looks after the firing of Shane Waldron. I'm not in the building. I don't know what the culture is like in Chicago. But what I do know is that Caleb Williams has not been the player that we watched at USC. Not just in that he's underperforming, but it's the accuracy. It's the arm talent. It's the pocket presence. Things are wrong. And I think you hope a lot of that is Shane Waldron. I do think Matt Eberflus brings value to this organization. I don't think it's necessarily his fault that the Bears are probably going to finish dead last in the NFC North for the 3rd year in a row. But ultimately, I do think he gets tossed, and I don't know that that's a positive for Caleb.
I do have something to say about the Caleb accuracy thing. I think there's a lot of those things that you can attribute to him. I think the accuracy is not necessarily entirely his fault because after Waldron was fired, we had multiple... Keenan Allen kind of went on a little bit of a rant about him to a reporter. And he was like, he's not telling these guys how to run routes. On plays, he's just letting them run whatever they want.
It looks like it.
Exactly. It's almost looks like Rodgers and the Jets, where Rodgers just isn't telling them to play. That's different. Waldron, he's not giving these guys a set of boundaries. So Caleb, he's putting way too much faith that Caleb's going to be able to read exactly what these guys are thinking, which most quarterbacks who aren't like 10-year vets can't do. So I think a lot of those accuracy, some of those accuracy issues, not all of them, can be attributed to Waldron not running a tight ship. And I agree with you. I think Eberflus will be out. If they look a lot better, I think he'll stay, but ultimately he's probably out. I don't necessarily know if he should be ultimately, just because I think just give Caleb a set, even if it's not the best ground, don't remove it from under him to try to put it, like if you he is standing above a sheet of boiling lava, and he's standing on like tinfoil right now. You remove the tinfoil and you try to put in a wood floor for him. Guess what? He already fell through by the time the wood floor got put back out. At least the tinfoil gives him a fighting chance. I don't think he'd kick him, but I do think he will get fired. I don't think it'll be during the season, but yeah, January, I think he's out.
We're going to see whether or not the Bears have learned their lesson as far as throwing quarterbacks into the fire and hitting them with a variety of different coaches and just disorienting their franchise signal callers. I think the more continuity for Caleb, the better.
Yeah.
Next up, we've got Zach Taylor with the Cincinnati Bengals, a head coach who's had some success in the past. Victor, I know you've got strong opinions on the matter. Take it away.
Well, I think I've made, if you're a listener of the podcast, if you're a BTS Army member, if you're a sicko, I think you know that I despise Zach Taylor's coaching job. I despise what he's done for the Bengals. I don't think he'll be fired.
I don't think he's going to get fired either. Part of me thinks that if the Bengals miss the playoffs, which is a very real possibility, as we discussed, he's gone. I disagree.
Maybe.
I think that NFL owners, they tend to look at the record. They tend to look at the playoff success. He's had a little bit of both, and I think it's going to keep his seat safe into 2025, even if he may not bring a lot as an X's and O's guy.
Yeah, I mean, he's just not a good play caller. I think we've talked about it. We've broken it down. He refuses to adjust his base scheme in the first place. Isn't that great anyway? His run game is very predictable. His passing scheme entirely relies on Joe Burrow to do the work for him. If he had anyone not named, I believe if he had Lamar Jackson as the quarterback, even if he had Patrick Mahomes as the quarterback, he wouldn't be successful. He's tailored his career around Joe Burrow. So I think he should be fired. Honestly, I don't even know if you should wait till the end of the season. I think he should be fired, but I don't think he will, because you went to the Super Bowl in 2021, you went to the AFC Conference Championship in 2022. 2023, you probably would have gone far if Burrow didn't get hurt. So next year, if they do another season like this where it's just clear they're not going to do anything of importance, then he's probably out, but they're going to give him another year, and I don't think they should.
I don't think he's a value adder as a head coach. I think what he gives you is a floor of competence where
That's true.
you're going to have an adequate culture. You're not going to have a ton of what the fuck sort of play calling. You're not going to have off the field issues. And when you're a team like Cincinnati, that is a double-edged sword, because you've got good players. You're usually going to make the playoffs, but on the other hand, it makes you think, what could this be if we hit on a hot young offensive mind and we get excellent play calling to coincide with a really good offensive talent? This could be a juggernaut sort of team.
Yeah, I agree, and it feels like they're not going to fire him because Zach Taylor's like the Chicago Bulls. He's always going to do enough to keep you in the conversation, but nothing he does is ever going to get you far. He needs a Derrick Rose in order to do anything, and then he's got Joe Burrow, but ultimately you can't do everything, and people are figuring him out year by year by year, and I think his time should be up, and I think it will be next year.
I think he's safe until he loses the locker room, and I don't think that happens this season.
True.
Next up, we have one of the league's older head coaches, Mike McCarthy, with the Cowboys, who are sitting at 3-6. And I hate to say it, I think he stays.
I do too. I think with 28 owners in the league, he's probably out. Not with Jerry.
Jerry was the deciding factor for me. McCarthy's had some success in the past, regular season success, we'll say. I think you can have a very similar conversation with McCarthy with what we just said about Zach Taylor. He's not a value adder,
No.
but the team's going to be in position to win more games when they lose, when they're not injured to shit, because as much as I hate the Cowboys, this season has been ripped away from them by injuries on both sides of the ball. They've had no chance. I don't think you chalk all of this up to McCarthy. I think if anything, again, I don't think McCarthy's an exceptional coach, but I think if you fire him for this season, fundamentally you're scapegoating him. I don't think Jerry's going to do that. I think he's back next year.
No, I don't think he will either, because Jerry's made his commitment to McCarthy very clear. And I think the re-signing of Prescott really solidifies that.
Absolutely it does. That was another deciding factor for me. I think he actually might have a little bit of long-term job security, because I think Dallas is probably going to be fine next year, regardless of playoffs or not.
You've got Dak and CeeDee. You've got quality around the organization. You've got Zimmer calling the plays on defense. He also provides a nice floor. You've just got a lot of high-end talent on this team. CeeDee, Dak, sometimes Tyler Smith, TU, shout out. Mike Parsons on the defense, Trayvon Diggs even. There is a nice floor to this team when they're all healthy, and I think the fact that they are just so beat up this year is going to keep McCarthy's job. And the situation that he's in, I think he probably is the most long-term job security of anybody here.
As long as my green and gold gets to take on Dallas in the postseason, I am happy for Mike McCarthy to remain the Cowboys head coach.
Yeah, just get revenge for everything he's done for the Packers.
Next up, we've got a first-year head coach, Gerard Mayo. The Patriots are sitting at 3-7, and if you asked me this a couple of weeks ago, I think I would have said one and done, but to me, it looks like we're seeing a different version of the Patriots playing with more defensive intensity and just some general offensive ability. We remember how absolutely lethargic this offense was to start the year. They found a little bit of a spark with Drake May, and I think they want to maintain some cohesion. Same head coach heading into year two.
Absolutely. I think I've always been a big fan of Gerard Mayo, not only as a player. I didn't get to watch much of him as a player. When I started watching football was towards the tail end of his career. But as a coach, what he did with the linebackers group in New England for so long was so impressive. And as he steps into the head coaching role, I don't think he's been bad this season. Even 2 weeks ago, I wouldn't have fired him. I thought that maybe they would. I thought that they might, and I think that would have been a travesty. But especially now, if he gets fired for this team's 3-7, 3-6.
Yes, 3-7.
3-7. This team, the fact that he's gotten this team 3 wins, the fact that Drake May's looking this good, the fact that this defense has had any semblance of normalcy. They haven't been they've been bad, but they've been consistently below average, which has made them bad. They haven't been fluctuating or anything. We've seen some development from guys like Keon White, from Christian Gonzalez, and I want to attribute a lot of this to him. He's providing a really good culture, honestly, a culture reset after the Belichick days. So I think this is one of the better young head coaches in the league, and I think that I don't know if they are, but if I was a New England fan, I would be pretty happy that we have Gerard Mayo as a head coach.
Kyle Duggar's been in and out of the lineup. This defense has 2 good players. You touched on Christian Gonzalez and Keon White, and he's turned this into a defense that, like you said, they haven't had the lowest of lows. He's not working with a lot, and I feel like they're getting better week over week. I think the thing I've been most impressed with Gerard Mayo is actually the way that he's reset the culture. Like you talked about post-Belichick, that was always going to be a big ask, especially as something of a Belichick disciple. There were going to be a lot of questions. What is this going to look like? And I don't remember what week he made the comment in, but he said something to the effect of, this team is not mentally tough. We are not mentally locked in right now. And that struck me as he's pulling out all the stops to try and keep this locker room. And this is not a team headed in a good direction. It looks like they've answered that. They're playing with more intensity. They're playing with more cohesion. And I think that maintains his job security into next year.
Absolutely, it should. And if next year May looks like he's not making much improvements, this defense still hasn't looked better, maybe you didn't do a good job of acquiring talent in the offseason, maybe the draft picks don't hit them, we can have a conversation about Mayo, but I don't think this is the year.
Next up, we have Doug Peterson of the 2-8 Jaguars.
I don't even know if we need to touch on this one.
You know what? I think there's a very real chance that he's back.
But
he needed to be fired last week, for God's sake. It's a contradiction.
I agree. I think we both agree that he should be fired.
He does nothing for this team. The culture is bad. The play calling is bad.
The best, it's like the old saying, the best week to fire Doug Peterson would have been like 5 weeks ago. The second best week is now. Do it now. But I think I see the vision. I think he could stick around. I think there's a better than good chance he sticks around.
I really do think that he's a great candidate to be fired before the end of the season, just because I think things are going to keep going downhill. They don't want Trevor Lawrence back in this lineup, and that's precisely why. What are you doing by keeping him around? Because Trevor Lawrence isn't going to be playing. They're not building anything this year. The season is tanked. Move on. Kind of get your cards in order early instead of pushing it to deeper into the offseason. I want to see Doug Peterson fired yesterday, but if I had to pick, ultimately I would say he sticks around.
Yeah, but when you look at this team, you look at this offense, there are 2 players, like we talked about the Packers earlier in the show, there are 2 players on this offense who have done better than we thought they would. Brian Thomas Jr. and Tank Bigsby, backup running back, both 2 young guys. Everybody else has either been worse or regressed, even in the case of Trevor Lawrence, or have just been barely meeting the expectations. He has done nothing good with this team just because the only thing you're hanging on to is the fact that he made this team look better than it was before him. But the problem was the guy before him was Urban Meyer. That's not exactly a high bar to hit. I think Peterson should have been out yesterday, but he should be out soon. And if he keeps his job, if he has the job in Week 18 when the playoffs roll around, I think he's probably keeping it throughout, because right now the culture is it's hard to tell when you're not in there, but when it's so transparently bad, that shows you it must be a lot worse in the locker room. Peterson went out there and said, I haven't lost a locker room. It's what you say when you do lost a locker room. You've got players coming out saying that there's a lot of quit in this team. you've got visibly upset guys on both the defense and the offense coming off the field. It's a bad situation, and I don't see a justification for giving Peterson another year.
I think he's a step down from Taylor and McCarthy because I don't think he provides the culture floor. It
Yeah.
looks like he doesn't have control over this team, not just in terms of, oh, nothing looks cohesive, but we saw Trayvon Walker's outburst. He doesn't have these guys playing disciplined.
Exactly, and obviously you want to attribute some of that to the players, right? You're an NFL player. You can't do stuff like what Trayvon Walker did. But that is your job as a coach. You need to train these young players. You need to mold them into not only better players but better people. And Doug Peterson seems like he's fundamentally failing at both. So
Here's another second-year head coach, Antonio Pierce. The Raiders are sitting at 2-7. They look like one of the most lifeless teams in the NFL. I think he's done after the season.
I'm gonna agree, and I think he should be as well.
What is he doing for this team?
Nothing really. I didn't like bringing him back in the first place. I didn't. Bringing that interim guy who everybody in the locker room loves, like, it just almost never works. That culture, it's really fun because it's a factor of, okay, we got Josh McDaniels out, horrible coach, great, we're all throwing a parade. Players very happy about that. So we got Antonio Pierce, and he doesn't suck as a person. He doesn't make us feel terrible about ourselves. So we're gonna rally around him, and then we start winning games, and then it's great. But eventually, that wears off.
The X's and O's are bad. The game management is
Awful.
among the worst in the league, 100%. Just sheerly outdated in terms of game management philosophies. What does he have, like the two most egregious punt decisions of the
I think
season?
so.
Maybe more. And the culture, well, he's holding it together. Things could be worse than they are in Vegas.
2-7 teams.
I would say so. It's not winning them football games. They're not the 2021 Giants or anything like that. And when what a coach does is culture and getting guys fired up, you need to see it on the field. It doesn't even have to be Detroit. Detroit is kind of the extreme version of you see culture on the field. It needs to look better than it does right now in Vegas. I don't see the long-term upside with Antonio Pierce. I also think you got to acknowledge this is a team that's going to rebuild. I mean, if you remember the Max Crosby situation, that was a big thing in keeping Antonio Pierce, and I think that the Max Crosby iteration of the Raiders is quickly running out of time.
Yeah.
I think they kind of clean house next year.
Yeah, I agree. This Raiders team, we're gonna see a big change, and it was like the Lions we saw it 3 years ago, where this team was just so devoid of talent, and then they got a new guy that built the culture up. And even when they were 0-10-1, you could still feel that this was a positive environment around the team. I don't necessarily feel that right now. It feels like Antonio Pierce, maybe if they had kept McDaniels into this year and then fired him right now, and then Pierce takes the reins towards the end of this year, then you kind of flip the roster and he goes in with this new roster, but he is still technically a part of that old guard, and I think he's gone after this year.
I agree. And lastly, we have Giants head coach Brian Daboll sitting at 2-8. This one was a tough one for me. I think he's out after this season.
I am inclined to agree with you, which is so hard because I don't think he should be.
I don't think he's a bad coach. It's just, I feel like it's been a while since we've seen what makes him great.
Yeah, and I agree with that. But I think it's also hard because what makes him great is he is like a quarterback whisperer. He's so good at setting up an environment around a quarterback and bringing out the most in a QB's talent. And when you have a quarterback that doesn't have a lick of talent in his body, it's kind of hard to bring that out.
He got Daniel Jones paid.
Yeah.
Mission accomplished.
And it's like I think this is one where if I'd have to be in the building to make a final decision, because if Daboll was one of those guys really pushing to keep Daniel Jones, really pushing to get that contract, this is your guy. You attached yourself to this horse, and since it lost, it's clearly not our guy. You can go out with it, and I have no problems with that. If Daboll was one of those guys pushing to keep Jones around, if you want to kick him out for that, I'm okay with it, even though I do believe he's a good X's and O guy, a good culture guy. But if he was one of those guys who didn't necessarily agree with that, this isn't his guy. And I don't think you can punish him for a GM's mistake.
I think it's a fine line because the Giants are not a good football team, and that clouds the evaluation. We don't know exactly what Brian Dable looks like with a solid football team, even when he brought the Giants to the playoffs and they won a wild card game. What did they knock off Minnesota in that one?
Yeah, they did.
That was not a good football team that he was coaching up. But man, it feels like since then, we haven't seen an elite culture. And we haven't seen him get the most out of the talent that he does have, which isn't a lot. I don't know. It's challenging. The Giants are going to be in the market for a new quarterback next year. And my big concern is, do you want to attach that new QB to Daboll in year 4?
Yeah, that is tough because if you feel like, okay, I've got the guy, maybe you do just want to clean house. Maybe you want to go after, maybe there's somebody in the 2025 class that you feel really good about. By the way, we'll get to that in a second. Maybe there's somebody there you feel really good about and you want to be like, I just want a new environment around this guy. Because there is something about the Giants that might be fun. There might be something wrong with that team, and maybe you just need to clean house to fix it. So if they do fire him, I'm not saying there's not merits to firing him. I don't necessarily think he deserves it, but it may not be his fault that it is the right decision to fire him.
He's probably the toughest call on this list.
Yeah.
Now we'll move on to our what if for the show. What if there aren't any starting caliber QBs in the 2025 NFL draft? I just want to set the scene real quick. The guys I view as potential early round, day 1, day 2 talents are Shedeur Sanders from Colorado, Cam Ward from Miami, Jalen Milroe from Bama, Drew Aller from Penn State, Garrett Nussmeier from LSU, and Quinn Ewers from Texas. If we were doing this 2 months ago, we'd have to shout out Carson Beck, but he just hasn't looked like an NFL caliber passer. So, anyone I missed?
I don't think so.
Do you see a true number 1 overall pick contender there?
I think the closest you've got is Garrett Nussmeier.
Really?
Yeah, well, okay. Him and Shedeur are probably the closest we've got, and even then, I don't think they'd even touch round 1 through 2 in my draft grading.
I think Cam Ward has a better shot because I think he has the upside. I think that Shedeur and Nussmeier are a little bit limited. But I don't see a number 1 overall pick caliber player. I don't even know if I see a top 10 pick caliber player in this class.
I see a round 1 caliber player. I don't think we take quarterbacks high, but I don't even think I see they took Kenny Pickett in the first round of 2022. I don't know if there's a Kenny Pickett caliber prospect in this class.
I could see Cam Ward, Jalen Milroe.
It depends on how he plays in the big games.
Yes.
The playoff will be important for a lot of these guys.
There's a lot of season left to play for these top passers. I could see myself grading them out as round 1 to 2 caliber prospects. There are a lot of teams in the NFL right now that are hungry for quarterbacks. The 3 that come to mind as these are teams that are definitely, unquestionably looking to upgrade. They need a new face calling their signs. The Giants, the Raiders, and the Browns.
I agree. Those are the 3 most QB desperate teams in the league right now.
There are a whole bunch of teams in this middle class, guys with, do we have a guy? Do we not have a guy? You look at the Panthers, the Saints. I mean, obviously, the Saints don't have a guy, but I don't think that they have to draft a new quarterback. You can let Spencer Rattler have a year. The Titans and the Colts, and then you have guys with veterans, the Steelers, the Rams, the Seahawks, the Jets, who would be open to developing the right quarterback. Then you got to start looking at a case-by-case basis on where we could see these teams going. The Raiders, I think they need a new player. What do you think about Shedeur?
As a Broncos fan, I don't hate it. No, I actually don't hate that. I don't hate that fit. Especially if they do keep Pierce around. I think that him and Pierce could really work together well. I don't hate Shedeur because I feel like the Raiders just need somebody with a floor. I think Shadeur's probably got the highest floor of anybody in this class.
They need some stability. I don't think they have the supporting cast right now to develop a raw, tradesy type of passer. That's not the route I want to see them go down.
If you put Ewers on this team, if you put Ward on this team, it would be a dumpster fire.
And then we look at Cleveland. I think they go with a bridge quarterback. And I think that bridge quarterback is probably on the roster. I could see them rolling with Jameis because it cannot be Deshaun Watson. They can't do it. That ship has sailed.
I think you'd be surprised. I mean, they gave him $230 million guaranteed in the first place. I think they could do it. I hope they don't. For the good of the sport, for the good of the team, for the good of the fans, for the good of the human race, I hope they don't do it. But yeah, I, I don't hate that. Give it to James. Give it to DTR. Why not? Why don't we do that?
There we go.
Yeah.
Whether you start DTR or Deshaun Watson, I don't think that's a huge difference in play. That's maybe the 55th best QB in the NFL versus the 61st. Probably the worst opening day starter since maybe Deshaun Kaiser, who
Ooh.
the Cleveland fans are gonna remember. He's a Packer for a while, so
We're going to get
shout
back to
out.
the era of Cleveland just putting out ridiculous quarterbacks. And you know who broke that trend? Baker Mayfield. And they tossed him aside like yesterday's cheese.
They wanted an adult in the room,
Okay.
and they got one. And then the Giants. I think out of all the teams on the list, the Giants are the team that's been waiting for a quarterback for the longest. This team's been out on Daniel Jones for 2 years, or at least the fans certainly have been. I think this could be a Cam Ward destination.
I like that. Because Cam Ward, I feel like, thrives whenever he's got a guy that he can just go to. Neighbors is there.
They have some of the infrastructure to set him up for success. He seems like the kind of guy who could survive in the New York media environment. I could see it. It just
think he'd
seems like
thrive,
it would be a
honestly.
lot of fun.
Yeah. It would. I like that fit a lot. I haven't really thought about that, but that would be a fun fit. But you know what? If it turns out that all of these guys just end up not playing well, we all end up just like, okay, this is just not a good class.
They're all early day 3 caliber players.
Yeah, if it turns out that, I think we could see some teams going best player available. Like even these QB needy teams. And I think that might be a good thing. We see all the time guys who will just reach on quarterbacks. First round quarterbacks that have a 30% hit rate anyway. So let's reach on one that we don't even think is a first round quarterback. I think if the class is so bad that we don't even think about taking any one of these guys in the first round, that could benefit some of these franchises. You don't have to worry about taking a quarterback in the first round. So you go out there and you grab like a franchise wide receiver. You get Tyrone McMillan. You get a great offensive tackle. You get Kelvin Banks, right? You know, you go out there and you get Nick Skirton, somebody like that, or a Will Johnson or Travis Hunter. There's a lot of guys in this draft who are really talented, guys who can build around, and then maybe next year, still not looking like the best QB class, but you never know if somebody's going to jump out, right? You never know.
Great opportunities to build up the offensive line. The other big consequence I think we see is we're going to see quarterbacks entering their second, third year who haven't had a lot of good tape. They're going to get more opportunities. I think Bryce Young is back in Carolina next year.
I do too.
Do you think there's some hope there?
I think I think there is some hope there, actually. I do. I don't think this is the segment to talk about it, but I really do think there's some hope in Carolina. And I don't think that they're going to move on from Bryce so quickly because he has shown some stuff in the past couple of weeks.
I think Levis gets another chance with the Titans, quite possibly. Maybe Richardson with the Colts. However, if the teams that these guys were drafted by are disillusioned with them and they want to go in a different direction, maybe we see some of these second, third year quarterbacks essentially become bridge guys, flyers for a front office that has maybe liked what they've seen from them a little bit better, and maybe you give up a third round pick for an Anthony Richardson. Maybe these guys are essentially part of the 2025 QB class.
I like that a lot. I like that a lot. And then, you know, you've got guys like Sam Darnold in free agency. Maybe we go after them. So this could be an interesting QB class, and the fact that it's not going to be through the draft. This could be, honestly, a revolutionary thing, especially because we talked about it in last tri-weekly recap, the rejuvenation of the project quarterback. These quarterbacks who are really toolsy but didn't know the game that well, they come in, they fail because they got thrown in the fire, and they have a couple of years to sit behind, and then they get better. So maybe this is the start of a new era of football, a new era of the NFL where teams, if they don't necessarily feel great about a guy they can get in the draft, why don't we go out there and we get a younger guy still who hasn't necessarily shown a lot, maybe shown some flashes, but we believe can get a second chance here and play good football.
Will Levis, anyone?
Yes, sir.
I think he
Will
fits the
Levis.
bill perfectly.
Oh, man. Will Levis opening next season on the New York Giants, throwing for 315 yards and 4 touchdowns. It's going to be a banner day in the pod.
The fact of the matter is, though, that there just aren't enough starting caliber quarterbacks to go around right now, not just in the draft, but in the entire league. We're going to see some bridge guys, and it feels like we're entering a weird era as far as bridge quarterbacks are concerned. We've seen a lot of the classic options just kind of trail off a little bit with age. Joe Flacco, I think, has shown that it's about time to hang up the cleats. Andy Dalton didn't look good with Carolina after having a handful of strong weeks. Jacoby Brissett, I think, kind of got dealt an unfair hand in New England.
That
but
line is just a travesty.
I don't think any team's going to be willing to give him another shot as a starter. The handful of guys that came to mind are obviously Jameis, whether it's for Cleveland or somewhere else. Justin Fields.
I like that. Like as a bridge, specifically.
I mean, it could go the other way as well. It could be Russell Wilson. We'll see who Pittsburgh likes. I think they like Russ.
I do too.
I think this is a possibility. I don't know how old he is. Marcus Mariota.
I like that a lot.
In the right system, I think he's all right.
Like you get a guy who knows how to use him. Maybe.
Or maybe we see the emergence of the young, new generation of clipboard holders, bridge quarterbacks. Maybe like an Aiden O'Connell came to mind.
Yeah, I absolutely could see him being that Daniel Jones bridge quarterback.
I thought about it. Not this year.
Yeah.
No team's going to want to run him out there as their opening day starter, but I think he's kind of the bridge quarterback archetype. 2 to 3 years down the road, we're going to see Daniel Jones back as a starter, and I can't wait to not watch those games.
I agree. We've compared him to Ryan Fitzpatrick without the charisma, so I think he could absolutely be a future bridge quarterback. And then maybe we see some of these guys like Zach Wilson.
Who knows?
I mean, we've heard some stuff in the Broncos camp about how they like him as a backup. He's a quality backup. So maybe we see some of these younger guys who aren't necessarily going to have the rejuvenation of I'm going to go out there and be a good starter. Maybe they just get good enough that they can use their tools to be a decent bridge. I honestly think you could talk about Sam Darnold as a bridge at this point.
I agree. I think he's shown us what his ceiling is, and it's starting quarterback in the right offense. I'm sure if you put him into a bad infrastructure, he's going to look just like the old Sam Darnold. I think we know his limitations, but you put the right environment around him, you get him in a competent supporting situation with good coaching. I think coaching is a huge aspect of building Darnold's confidence. He can get you to the playoffs.
Absolutely. He's a really good guy for when you've got a good roster. You don't want to waste the season, but you still don't have that guy at QB. So I feel like there are a lot of that kind of guy is there's not many of them right now. So Sam Darnold might go for a little bit in free agency.
It's going to be fascinating to eval these 2025 draft quarterbacks and see if we have a guy who really sticks out to us, a guy with that true number one or that true first round grade slapped on top. I don't know. I haven't watched all the All-22 on these guys yet.
Neither have I. We could be surprised, but you gotta tune into the draft episodes, man. They're gonna be very good on the Balls Talk Sports pod. The draft episodes here are gonna be great.
He's all the way back. And speaking of bold predictions, I suppose it's time for our official bold prediction segment. I'm pulling out the spinner.
We get bold on this podcast.
Yes, we do.
We don't shy away from the take. So listen, we can't be held responsible for anything we say, but if we're right, I want the credit. If we're not right, we're always right.
That's how I live my life. Assume you know more than everyone else.
As you should.
Victor, I'll deal you your prediction first. And we've got Psychic's Choice. It's totally up to you. Anything you want.
All right. Now, there's multiple things on this, so I got to look closely at this. I'm going to go with quarterback controversy. I've alluded to this earlier in the pod. I think Bryce Young is a quality NFL starter. I think he's all the way back.
That's bold.
I think
As
he's
promised.
all the way back. It's a bold prediction for a reason. I'm not going to shy away from this. Listen, 2 days ago, I went back and I watched every Bryce Young snap from this season, from the bad early in the season to the last 3 games. There is a difference. There is a big difference. And people are going to say, okay, well, he's looked good against, what was it, the Giants and who else? The Saints.
Yeah.
He looked good against the Broncos. Like, they lost badly, and he had some bad moments. But every quarterback had some bad moments. I feel like we have this tendency to look for the bad moments with guys that we already think are bad and look for the good moments that we already think are good. There are a lot of moments where you'll see Patrick Mahomes and Josh Allen just throw absolute stinkers out there. But then they're going to go out there and do amazing things. Bryce Young is changed as a player. And I think the biggest issue with him, it was never that he didn't have talent. It was never that he wasn't a smart guy. It was never that he didn't have a feel for the game. It was that he lost his confidence so quickly last season. Frank Reich and that offense were not good for him. He was getting hit every other play. His receivers were dropping everything. So what happened was, early on in this season and late on in last season, he just stopped throwing what he liked to do. One thing Bryce Young absolutely loves to do is he loves the layered throw. We saw it at Alabama and we saw it early on in his career, and we've seen it recently come back where there's a receiver between two defensive backs, and he's just gonna put it over the linebacker and right into the hands of the receiver for a nice 20-yard gain. He does that on crossing routes, and he does that on out routes, and it was so good at Alabama. It was a reason that I loved him so much, and it's come back. He's putting these balls in the right spot. The accuracy has actually been average to plus in the past 2 weeks. He's making plays, and it's not just the fact he's standing in the pocket. All right, he's sitting there. Maybe he's still a little bit uncomfortable, still a little bit jittery. There's still some of that reflex that I'm about to get hit. But he is standing in the pocket, and then he has reinvigorated that escapability that we saw at Alabama. He's getting out of the pocket, and he's finding a man on the run. He loved to keep his head down early in the season. His head is up and looking whenever he's out of the pocket. Out of structure finally feels good again. We all saw that play against the Giants last week where he gets out of the pocket and he finds, I believe it was Xavier Legette in the end zone, or it was Coker, and he's having fun again. He's confident. The accuracy is there in a decent. His out of structure stuff looks comfortable. He is making the right reads. I still don't think he's the best processor. I still don't think his arm is the best in the league. There's a reason why I'm not saying, okay, he's a top 10 quarterback. I think he's maybe I think he can be the 20th best quarterback in the league, maybe even the 18th best quarterback in the league, which is really good for the NFL. That's a really good player, man. So I think Bryce is all the way back. There's still some stuff to go. There's still some stuff to do, but I don't think the Panthers should move on. I think they've got a starter, even if it's not an elite one.
It was fun to see him looking like he was having a good time playing football again against the Giants. I remember he ripped off a big scramble and he made the first down sign, and that was significant enough that the announcers touched on it. Like, Bryce Young's making the first down sign. We haven't seen him do that very much this season. I would love for Bryce Young to be back. My prediction prompt is fraud alert. And I'm not going to go after a team. I'm going to go after another quarterback. I think that Tua is a net negative for the Miami Dolphins. And it's not just the uncertainty with the concussion stuff. That certainly plays a role. When you can't bank on your guy to be healthy, I think it fundamentally limits you as a team. But it's also his play style. I think that the way Tua needs to win is so hyper-specific to the offense that Miami is trying to run, that's speed-based and anticipation-based. And sure, the highs can be high, but you're only winning one way, and even that way is hit or miss, because when you're anticipating these route concepts so far ahead of time, sometimes things just aren't going to go exactly as you were expecting. Defender's going to get a hand and the ball is popped up. He doesn't provide rushing ability, so he doesn't change the numbers in the box. I think that it's an extremely difficult ask to win a Super Bowl with the Tua Tagovailoa offense.
I'm with you there. I mean, yeah, you bring up some really good points. I don't see a situation where a team this hyper-focused on one way of playing can win 4 straight games against the best that the NFL has to offer.
You got to have counterpunches in the NFL. That's what we see from true Super Bowl contenders. They have a multitude of ways to win. Look at Baltimore right now in the 4 or 5 different ways they can beat you on offense. And then you compare that with the Dolphins, where maybe 1 out of 3 weeks they're going to drop 35 points when they run into a team with a bad secondary. I just think it's a tough way to live against good opponents.
Agreed. Miami, they're kind of stuck in this weird bit of limbo where you can't get rid of Tua, you can't get rid of Mike McDaniel because you've committed a lot to him, and you're still winning.
Kind of.
But yeah, it's back to that Chicago Bulls analogy where you're doing just enough to stay in the conversation every year, but you're never going to be in anything. You're never going to be more than just a team that we've conversed about. Maybe the next 2 years, if you keep it the same way, you're going to be on our Contenders or Pretenders segment, and you're going to be a pretender, or you're going to be an alive team on the alive or dead segment. And it's just, you're never going to be more than that.
All right, folks, that's all we've got for you. 2 podcasts in 2 days, about 4 hours, maybe more of recording time. I hate football. I never want to talk about it again. I'll see you next week. Victor, any last words?
It's going to be a fun weekend. Hope y'all enjoyed this one. Tri-weeklies will theoretically be coming out every 3 weeks from now on, so we'll try to bank on that.
Is that what try means?
I think it is, actually. So we thought try meant like whenever the fuck we wanted, but I think I'm realizing now that it's every 3 weeks, so we're going to try to stick to that.
We thought it was try as in make an effort, T-R-Y.
Yeah.
And that we do. Ladies and gentlemen, stay hard.